Only got the track Staring into Space up right now, where we're going to be looking at the drums. So starting off with the raw drum sound. This is what it sounds like on its own. Again, like I mentioned previously, like the setup I've used is very like wide panned for the overheads, and that rides like really significantly on the right. And I just love the drummer perspective thing, especially when a few fills come on later on. You can really hear like the dum dum, and if you can hear everything like laid out in front of you, just something I'm a fan of. So I'm gonna start off now with the kick. So for the kick drum, I have obviously EQ 7-band. I really wanted like a prominent kick. For some reason on this track it wasn't as like punching as it has been on the other two recordings. So I really wanted this, like I wanted more of a feeling rather than a sound. So I've got it rolled off past 2k, not 2k, 6k, sorry. No, my bad. Reading the wrong part. I've got it rolled off from about 1k here. Quite a harsh roll off, and then quite a severe boost from anything below 100 hertz. And as well as this, I've got the MC77 limiting amplifier. I use this just as a different style of compressor, just to get a listen and see like the kind of sounds I can get from it. And as you can see, I've got that like quite high, the attack's quite in the middle, and then the release is very high. And then from that, this is the kick sound we got. Again, not anything like super mind blowing, but like just nice, very fitting for the song, I'd say. Next up, we've got the snare. Now I went a bit crazy with the snare. So first off, we'll start with the EQ. You've got to think for this genre, like the hard hit of the snare that we could hear originally is a bit much. So first off, I started with a preset lo-fi to get an idea of like what Pro Tools thinks it should sound like with the snare sound that I've got. And I still thought that was a bit much, so using this bandpass here, I brought it down by 10 dB at around 3 kilohertz and made that quite wide, just because like the snare is quite hard hitting and I want it to be soft, similar to like the kick drum. It's like, again, it's like shoegaze, like a lo-fi style. It's really quiet, but then in doing that it made it a bit too dull. So I then went and put a limiter on, because a limiter can sometimes be like a good tool to use for bringing a bit of like bit of extra like something to the sound. Obviously it brings all the dynamics up into 1, and it brings the levels up to more consistent. And it just works really well for me. It's not anything like super major, and the ceiling hasn't been changed. All I've done is made a minus 3 dB threshold change. And then next up from there, I've got my saturator, which I've got on the machine settings on lo-fi, and the output's high. So it really like crackles and sizzles when it hits. And I've got the drive up quite high. I haven't really adjusted many of the settings, and the output's been put up a little bit just to give it a bit more push. Again, I want that snare to be like soft and lo-fi and not have like the crack, but also like still have like a place in the mix. And then finally, I've got another 7-band EQ where I've just completely dipped. I started out with the preset emphasize the crack, and I pretty much just flipped that to really like dull it down. I've done that by about 7 dB at about 7k, which is obviously quite a lot. So this is what that sounds like. As you can hear, it's quite quiet. So then from there, I've also got my drum compression, parallel compression. So I'll add that back in, and I've also got my drum reverb, which is 2 separate boxes. Again, nice and quiet. Just a little something that like adds to the mix. Next up now, oh, sorry about that. Next up now we've got overheads, which are obviously panned hard left, hard right. For these, it's identical on each, but again, that ride, I want it to be like really soft and like just like tickling your ear, but in this it was really like belly. So whilst I was struggling a bit with it and I was feeling a bit constrained, I really went hard on my high pass filter and my low pass, with my low pass being all the way up to 4 kilohertz and my high pass being up to about 1k, making the space of the cymbals being very small. And even then I've pulled down 4k by about 8 decibels, so the cymbals are really like washed down. And then as well as this, I've also done the same thing where I've pulled down what would be like the crack of a snare, which is also like your cymbal range, really like that top end, about 7k, and I've done that by about 7 decibels. And I've obviously done that on both. And then as well as that, I've got my drum verb, and as well as this, I've got another even longer reverb, so I really wanted some like wash for my cymbals. So let's have a listen to those, shall we? As you can hear, it's like very quiet. It's picking up a lot of snare, which is why it wasn't that important to have the snare really like cranked on the snare mic track. And then I didn't use the room mic because it didn't really add anything, and I feel like with this style it was less is more. However, I was glad I put it up because it worked really well for the other 2 tracks. So even though I'm not using it, it was a good addition to the mix, I'd say. Finally, for this one, to get that more distinct drum sound, I made a drum bus, which is where I send all of the drum parts to one aux, a stereo aux, and then apply effects then to that for my preferences. So first off, I did a bass EQ for the full thing. I boosted the bottom end. I had some warmth here by boosting about 200 hertz with like a wide range by about 5 dB. I also cut at 2k a little bit, just to bring like, again, that like wash and emphasis down. And then a slight little roll off with a shelving filter at about 10k. Again, like we want a really like mellow lo-fi mix with this. Then I've got my saturator again. This one's driven quite high and it's got on the lo-fi setting now. No noise on or anything like that. I tend to save that for the mastering chain. I've then got a compressor, which I've used the preset mid tamer, because obviously those mids are a bit much, especially with that snare. So I found this quite effective preset to work with, and then I've adjusted the settings as I do please. Mainly with the makeup gain, like bringing all the levels up, bringing all the dynamics. And then just as a little like experimentation, I added a flanger, just because I feel like to get that more analog sound, like it has that like natural flanger sound. So after playing around with the settings a little bit, the rate, the feedback, I've also bring the mix down quite heavily. So it's very minute, but it's just that little bit of like little sprinkle of something in the mix. And then finally, again, a bit more experimentation. I tried a graphic EQ on the kind of phony setting, so like it's as if like old landline. And after that, I've then readjusted the settings. This is no different from another EQ, but I don't know, like even going through it, it has like a different sound to say the 7-band EQ. So it was like just something nice to add. And then with the addition of some drum verb that I created on a track, quite a short reverb, I think. No, my mistake. One of them is very short, and then the drum verb's the long one, which is a church reverb. I've got that quite consistent on the drums. All in all, that is how I created my drum sound for this track. This is what it sounds like. As you can hear, like the ride isn't like washing out too much. The kick is really like pillowed and comfy, and the snare is quite prominent but not too much. And I don't know if you heard there, but the tom hits, like they were really flat and dead, but you can really you can really hear them like come across the stereo image, especially in headphones, which I'm really happy with. I think this is probably the best drum sound I've got so far. So yeah, that's the drums for Stare Into Space.